surrender to the mystery, as hard as that is. I think if we can do that and just accept and embrace and let life kind of show us the way, I think things will be a lot easier for us.
Welcome to SoulPod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. I'm your guide, Crystal Cassidy, and together we will bridge the seen and the unseen, science and spirituality, the practical and the profound. From quantum physics to energy centers, near-death experiences to extraterrestrial contact, join us as we delve into the mysteries of consciousness and journey together towards a more awakened, compassionate, and soul-connected world. Find your seat, drop in, and let's go on a journey together. Welcome back, light beings, another episode of Soul Podcast. And this week, I am so excited to be chatting with our very beautiful, very powerful, very mystical Jules. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you, Crystal. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah, we'll be talking about Jules' awakening story, some of the amazing things that she's built, including this conscious communication card deck, which everybody needs to check out, and her book series. And so to start, Jules, I would really love to hear what was pre-awakening Jules like, and what was this initial catalyst for your awakening?
Okay, so I had my first Kundalini / spiritual awakening experience in, it was the end of April, early May 2012. Before that was just, I didn't really necessarily believe in spirituality. I didn't believe in it at all. And I also thought that people who believed in God were a little off kilter.
So did you grow up religious at all or not really?
0% religious. It was one of those families
Same.
that we went to church on Christmas and that was about it, and, we even thought vegetarians were weird growing up. Like that we're very just like your typical American family from my perspective. Of course, there's an array of American families, right? But yeah, no spiritual background, no religious background, nothing like that. And when I was in my 20s, which was when this happened, well, before this happened, I was just a normal person. Like I loved traveling. I loved, good food. And I didn't have really too much direction, I guess, in life other than I just wanted life to show me what it was made of. Like I wanted life to show me itself. So I was always open to new experiences and I was always open to moving. At that point, I had lived on 3 different continents by 2012.
Wow.
Yeah, so
It's interesting this all started in 2012 because in speaking to a number of people, and myself included, everything seemed to accelerate in 2012.
Yeah, it was, I was reading after my experience, after my awakening, I just dove headfirst into the realm of spirituality and the history of religion and what the spiritual texts were saying. And specifically because it was 2012, the Mayan calendar and expecting everything to end and like that whole thing. Like I remember actually I was on an airplane on New Year's at the very end of 2012, just being like, what's going to happen? Is the plane going to fall out of the sky? Like not really
interesting,
but also kind of curious, like maybe,
Yeah, and the world did kind of end in a way as far as how we had been operating up until that point. It felt like the initiation point of so much change and awakening. And I'd love to hear more about your specific awakening experience.
Okay, yeah, sure. So it really starts back in college. I think I was 26 or 27 when I was in 2012, but it really starts back when I was in college. So it was my freshman year. I had this really great friend who gave me this book called The Power of Now, as our freshman year was coming to a close. And at the time, I didn't really have any interest, like I said, in spirituality or self-help or anything like that. I was mainly interested in boys and partying at the time. But anyway, he gave me this book, and because he was a dear friend, for me, it was one of the most thoughtful books or most thoughtful gifts that I had received.
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, from my point of view. So, at that point, I was living in New York, going to college. I did a semester abroad in Barcelona. I then met my now husband. We moved to Israel together. And throughout all of my travels and all of my journeys, I kept that book with me, but I never opened it. Never, just never opened it. And then it was late 2011 and I go to my husband. I'm like, listen, we were living in Israel at the time. I'm like, I'm not happy. I want to go back to New York. I want to, get my groove back. I want to find my joy again. Would it be okay if we moved back to New York for a few months? And so we did that. Even though we had businesses in Israel, like we moved back, we lived in Hoboken for 2-3 months. And while I was in Hoboken, I realized that, hey, I felt discontent when I was living in Massachusetts. I felt discontent when I was living in New York. I
Mm.
felt discontent when I was in Spain and then Israel and now again here. And, this kind of aha moment of like, what's the common denominator, Jules?
Mm.
You're
Yeah.
discontent wherever you are, and the only thing that's a consistent factor is you. It was a very powerful moment, and I was like, oh, wow, what do I do now with that information though? Like, I didn't really know what to do with that information next. So we moved back to Israel, and a few months later, it was like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this. I'm sure you have to some degree, but it was as if the universe was kind of like slightly like, giving me a nudge. But it was very clear that this was from something like external that was kind of giving me like a little wink, a little like push where it's like, that book that you got back in college? You remember that? It's time to read it now. So I sit down and I read about 40 pages of this book, and I literally only 40 pages. And I close the book, and it was like I am seeing life with just kind of like a new lens.
Mm.
Because one of the sentences that you're probably very familiar with, most people are probably very familiar with at this point, is if you're living in the past, you're experiencing probably depression. If you're living in the future, you're probably experiencing anxiety. And the only moment where you can find real peace and the only moment that ever exists and ever will exist is the present moment, right? And that's the only place where you can find peace. And that sentence hit me so hard. Like, I
Mm.
don't think I was ready to really embrace that message. I needed the lesson that happened in Hoboken, like in New York, that, of like, my internal world is what's causing me pain, not the external. And I needed to hear that and understand that first in order for me to receive the message that was in this book. And I'm very clear on that, and
Mm.
that order of
Full body chills
totally.
hearing that experience. Yeah, it's and just to kind of pin something you mentioned here, that moment where you start to realize that life is not coming at you, it's coming from you, and you're making this connection between your inner world and your outer world, and more emphasis starting to get put on your inner world.
Yeah.
That's just like that's a paradigm shift, I'm sure, in so many ways.
And
Same for me.
yeah, it absolutely was. And it's an ongoing process, right? Like it's an ongoing process where, I want to change something externally, but really deep down, I know that it's the internal thing that needs to shift. And I'm still working on it every day.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lifetime process, really.
Eckhart Tolle. Yeah, if you haven't checked out The Power of Now and A New Earth, another one of my favorites that I read or try and reread about every year.
Hmm.
And it helps you understand the nature of the ego in such a powerful way, and the nature of presence. And so you're sitting there, you've read 40 pages of this book, and was it this instant experience of feeling and kind of looking? It sounds like you took the glasses off and you were looking at the world with a new perception. Was that
Kinda.
confusing? Was it blissful? Like, what did it feel like?
It was the best thing in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
this is only the beginning of, this kind of taking the glasses off moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I closed the book, I put it down, and that incessant chatter that,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like most of us have it, some of us less, some of us more, but that incessant chatter, I think it was the first time in my adult life that had actually stopped, completely silent. And all I was left with was just experiencing what is without the labels, without the criticism, without the critique in my mind. And that was it, right?
Yeah, the witness.
The witness. Yeah, exactly. And so what happened was there was this energy that kind of felt almost palpable at everything that I looked at. All the colors were more vibrant. There was almost this buzz of life that was coursing through everything. And I kept thinking to myself, has this always been like this? And I just was blind to it because there was so much peace and joy and what was being shown to me. I was just like, great, give me more of that. Like, fabulous. I didn't think it was weird, actually. I didn't think it was weird. I didn't think it was abnormal. I was just really grateful. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna, surrender, right? Yeah. It's it's something I wish that every human being on the planet could experience because it was
Mm.
so beautiful. Like I had mentioned, I was not interested in it. I didn't know something like this could exist before. Like I didn't know. I had never heard about things like this. But when
Yeah.
I opened my eyes, it was like I was connected to something else, or maybe it was, information was being shared with me, something like that, where it was I knew without a shadow of a doubt that everything was made up of vibrating energy.
Yeah.
Science has proved this. I had no idea about this at the time. Everything was made up of vibrating energy. Everything was connected energetically. Everything had a frequency. It was the most profound love I had ever felt in my whole life. And it cut so many mental cords that I was not able to cut before. Like any depression or anxiety or fear, just gone, absolutely
Mm-hmm.
gone. And it was this knowing that God was real. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't specify a religion, just God is real. It wasn't a Christian God or a Hindu God or anything like that. It was just God is real. I felt as small as an atom and as big as the universe all at the same time.
Mm.
I knew that we were spiritual beings having a human experience. And I also knew that when we die, we don't actually die. Our
Mm-hmm.
bodies will die, but a part of us continues on. And it was this feeling of eternity. There was no beginning and there was no end. It was just forever. There was, people talk about having these experiences of no time, where time doesn't exist. So I was in that dimension and I
Mm-hmm.
touched into something really, really absolutely profound. Like it happened like that fast, right?
Right.
All of this just like zoom. And I do think, again, it's really important to emphasize that I had absolutely no idea that any of this was even a remote possibility. Like I'd never heard
Right.
stories like this prior.
And you hadn't been meditating, you hadn't been doing spiritual practices.
Zero.
This really was a spontaneous awakening in so many ways. I mean, spontaneous as the book feels like it was definitely a propellant.
Yeah.
And I had such a similar experience, and for me it was this transition, this transcendent experience from belief to knowing, like you're talking about, where you just know. It's almost like the awakening has bypassed the analytical mind and the ego, and it just goes straight into your soul.
Right.
And I wonder for you if it's the same. It's so hard to put words to that experience because it's so transcendental and outside of space and time. And this perception and this knowing of that connection that you talk about, which I think is what we have been calling God, this like remembrance of connection and love between everything. So it's life changing. You don't really come back from that, right? It's forever changed you.
Yeah, I think it would forever change anybody. It got rid of my fear. I didn't really have a fear of death beforehand, but any fear that I have was completely gone. I just continue, that's when I started to get into meditation and get into,
Mm-hmm.
breath work and understand, like learn about the chakras and things like that.
And so you mentioned that it feels like you had broken a lot of these thought loops
Yeah.
until you got back to New York. So maybe tell us, I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, it was kind of like if, let's say Nirvana, let's say if you're in Nirvana or Samadhi and you're in that state, let's say that you're functioning at 100%. I'd say the average person maybe functions between, I don't know, 30-40%, let's say, on a daily basis with all the fears and the worries and the responsibilities of life kind of pushing us down a little bit. But let's
Mm-hmm.
just say Samadhi is like 100%. I was probably functioning at 95% for like the rest of the year. My vessel was totally cleansed of trauma or blockages, anything
Mm.
like that. So I was constantly getting these like downloads, and this information was just coming through me, which was really, I mean, it was really special.
What
Yeah.
was that like, and where do you think that information was coming from, and how did it inform your life and your awakening?
I do think that there is information all around us at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's like a radio, like you can tune into it if you are on that frequency or not. And so I think that my energy was just going to different frequencies at such a rapid rate that I was tapping into these different levels of information that you can only access at certain frequencies. And I know, that sounds woo woo to a lot of people. Science is proving it more and more every day.
I think our
So
audience is pretty open to it.
I know, I know, I know. But anyway, I think I think that's what was going on. Like,
Yeah.
part of me believes that, a part of me believes that, for example, aliens, like what we call aliens, are they from other planets? Yeah, potentially. But how do they travel? I think because we don't have the technology yet to go to a planet that's 30 million light years away, right? From our limited perspective, maybe that technology does exist somewhere else. But my belief currently is that these beings that I do think are real, that they visit us interdimensionally, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily planetarily.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Or
they're,
both, potentially. Yeah.
or both, or potentially,
Yeah. We love this conversation.
yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think
super
there's
fascinating.
so much possibility with how old the universe is, the probability of life. And like you're mentioning, this information almost like your tuning fork or old school TVs, where you can change the frequency and you get different information, but it's the same container that you're using. That's really how I like to think about it. And you can be connecting with all kinds of intelligence. And usually, and I would think maybe not even usually, most, if not all the time, at those frequencies, that intelligence is very benevolent and loving because they've had to get themselves to that level of consciousness.
Well, I think this is where you and I, have potentially different perspectives on this.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
I would love to think that all of these beings have only good intentions. I would absolutely love to believe that. But when I was vibrating at my highest, that was when, these negative experiences with either entities or spirits started to happen.
Mm.
About a year after I had my awakening, it was the summer of 2013, moved back to the States. I was living in my dad's house. My dad lives in Boston. And so my husband and I went to go stay with my dad for about a week together. And my sister growing up had always talked about these experiences that she had been having, like, yeah, a ghost would visit her, or the radio would go off randomly, or she would see, a jacketed man in the corner of her room, like this shadow guy, or just really weird things happening. And I'm like, you're dreaming. This is not possible, like, whatever. And then I came back to my dad's house after I had had my awakening, and I was very open. And, the first experience that I had was an entity wrapping itself around me like a snake, kind of choking me and scaring me and trying to get me to exit my body.
Mm.
And that is terrifying for someone who doesn't know what's going on. Even for someone who does know what's going on, that this is an entity, that this is a spirit, like, it's a terrifying thing. And so you would think that the higher you vibrate, it's only good stuff, but it's definitely a mix.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's the case. We did an episode which everybody can check out called Realms of Consciousness. And I think you're bringing up such a good point, which we talked about in that episode, which is that there's negative energies. And the same kind of thing happened for me when I was awakening at the very early point in my journey. Is one of the first things I started to perceive was ghosts and
Mm,
these darker entities. And even though you're raising your consciousness, it's almost like it's opening doors to those realms that you may not have seen before. So it makes total sense to me that
mm.
that could be an experience. It was also my experience. And I'm super curious, as you experience darkness in this part of your awakening, for me, it was really calling me forward to kind of find my own power, which is
Hmm.
an ongoing journey of finding your power through your awakening when you're faced with the darkness.
Hmm.
So how did it feel when you were in relationship with this dark entity? How did you move through that?
It did actually succeed in me having an out of body experience. It was my first
Mm.
out of body experience because as soon as I had exited, I just knew that I'm not supposed to be here.
Hmm.
And so I remember reading in, I don't know, some article or some YouTube video or something like that, where if you're having an out of body experience, just imagine yourself re-entering your body. And that's how you get back essentially. What I did, and I was back in my body and like, almost immediately, but it kept happening. Like it kept trying to make me like leave my body again. Like it
Which is
happened maybe.
super scary.
Super scary. And then I talked to my sister about it the next day, and she's like, "You see, I told you." And I'm like, "Yep, yep. You're not crazy after all."
Yeah, it's scary. I've certainly had ghost, and we've talked a little bit about this demonic entity that I came into contact with was super scary and sounds similar to your sister's experience, that it was very much interacting with me in the physical, like the bed was shaking, like very poltergeisty. And you're sitting there being like, how could this possibly be happening? It's not an earthquake. Nothing else in the room's moving, but my bed is sitting here just going nuts because something's trying to interact with my energy. And yeah, it's an unnerving experience, and I'm so glad we're talking about it because I don't think it's talked about enough. And I feel like it's such a big part of so many people's journeys. And there's also, we've talked about this a little bit before too, which is there must be lessons in this experience, right? There's something that we can learn or move through and maybe better understand what these entities are. Are they like, I don't have the answer for that, but I do wonder if it's like if everything's connected, maybe it's reflections of our own subconscious, maybe it's disembodied consciousness that has become more and more negative over time and you can tune into it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of changed. There was a period of time where I was interacting with that darkness quite a lot. Not as much anymore, but every now and then. So from these like scary experiences, is that still going on, or did this eventually die down for you? And how did you move forward in your awakening journey?
Well, yeah, they continued happening. The most recent one happened about a year ago. It wasn't a negative experience. It was actually a good experience. And so I do think that there are, good forces that are trying to bring us back to a healthier path, I guess,
Hmm.
for lack of a better term, that are trying to help us kind of, shake these things and shake these experiences off, which gives me some peace of mind.
Yeah, and they can never infiltrate your soul. Your highest self is always whole. Your soul is always safe. I think that's something for me has been really important to remember in some of those challenging moments. What was your second Kundalini awakening like?
Well, if the first one was, heaven and nirvana,
Hmm.
the second one was absolute darkness, hell on earth, really, really difficult, challenging experience that happened in 2016 with another book.
Interesting. Books are portals for you.
Yeah, I gotta be careful. Gotta be careful what I read.
Yeah.
What was the name of the book? It was called The Untethered Soul.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And
Powerful.
so, yes, there's a section in that book that teaches you, the whole book basically talks about, if you have emotions that you have not dealt with, they stay as trapped energy inside the body and can cause all types of problems, right? That's essentially like the core of the book. And in this one section of the book, he describes a meditation that you can do where you can tap into this energy that is like concentrated in your root chakra, and you can kind of release that and burn that off as it rises up into your heart chakra and kind of
Mm.
release that stuck energy. And I was like, great, this sounds great. Let's give it a try. So I did it, and very successfully, I might add, not realizing kind of what I was tapping into. And immediately, every time I tapped into it, I felt that it was palpable. Like the energy was
Hmm.
rising from my root chakra into my heart chakra and burning off into my heart chakra. But the fourth time that I did that, I fell asleep while I was meditating, which was a big mistake. The next morning that I woke up, there was just electricity coursing through my body. Every cell
Mm,
was affected by this energy. And it threw me into this state of like depersonalization, SD, that
mm,
quite honestly just terrifying. Like I had never experienced anything like that before. And it took
mm.
about 8 months for that energy to dissipate. There was so much
Wow.
of it. Yeah. And,
So
that,
it was a really physical experience,
mm,
feeling that energy.
oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so. And I think that because my nervous system was so blown wide open, it gave
Mm,
space for entities to kind of, maybe come in or attach or things like that. And I mean, I'm a full believer in entities, and I don't know how you would exactly you would define them as, disembodied consciousness or what, but they're definitely real.
yeah, it's interesting some of this that you bring up, and take it or leave it. But one of the realms of consciousness that we talk about a bit at SoulPod is the subconscious realm.
Hmm.
And so just to give our listeners a little bit of guidance here, because what I don't want to do is elicit too much fear. But yeah, but one thing we talked about in the realms of consciousness is the subconscious realm, which I had a very similar experience. One of my friends had, I've talked about this before, but had a experience through a psychic, and something connected with us after that experience. We were both there. She experienced it first in the dream state, and this entity was trying to attach in her subconscious experience. And then the next day, we had talked, and she was very stressed out about it. The next day, this entity came for me, because for whatever reason I don't think it could access my subconscious. It was messing with me in the physical, and this is the whole bed shaking that I was talking about earlier. And I saw this very dark, scary, the scariest thing you can imagine in the movies, like that was at the end of my bed. And it was so scary, it was almost comical to me, because I was like, this can't possibly be the case. But I do think that this is a very real thing. I do think that there's entities, but what I would love for people to remember, that I resonates very deeply in me and my own journey, is that you are more powerful than these entities. And there is a process of realizing this power that you can step into. And like I mentioned before, your highest self, your soul, cannot be messed with. Like that is always there, that you always have that connection to your highest self. And it's really hard to explain, but there came a point for me where I knew that these entities couldn't mess with me.
Mm.
And that took me time. It took moving through some fear, for sure. But I want to give people just a little seed there to think about that possibility. And it doesn't mean that these experiences don't happen. I know they do, because I've experienced it. But it does mean that I think there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's how that manifests, and how you move through it is your own personal journey for everyone. But it can certainly be very, very unnerving. The other thing that it served for me was, I was so curious about it. I was like, how are these entities,
Mm.
like this consciousness that isn't tied to the physical body, what the heck is that about? Like the scientist in me got really kind of
Mm.
curious and almost excited about it in an odd way, perhaps. But I was like, this is so bizarre, like these
So bizarre.
weird negative energies that are trying to mess with us in different, whether it's in the waking state, in your dream state, the meditative state. They're there, and it must be for some sort of reason.
I mean, I look at entities as like I look at people, right? They
Mm,
have the full spectrum of, dark and light within them, and it's
yeah.
kind of like you meet a person on the sidewalk on a bad day and they cuss you out, but normally they could be like a really great person. So that's how I look at entities as well. I'm like, they're capable of both, being a beacon of light and being a beacon of darkness, right? So that's kind of how I see it. Like I don't think any
I like that. Yeah.
I don't think anything is inherently good or bad. I think
Hmm.
entities are just like us. And it's just kind of like what, you can have all of the experience. You can have the beautiful light-filled experiences with them too. And then you can also have the dark as well. And
Hmm.
I would really like, there's this idea that the experiences that we have with these entities are due to the frequency that we're at. It's like, oh, people are like, you had this negative entity because you're vibrating at a low frequency. I would really like to argue that theory because I just don't think that's true at all. I think kind of like, oh, if there's this terrible thing that happened to you, is like you manifested that into your life.
I actually think it's more like as you increase your awareness, you're increasing the amount of light in the room. And so you're able to see more and perceive more. And the seeing and perceiving is not just of more light, it's of more dark as well.
It's of everything. You see more everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you had and I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but I'll go into it. You had some illness, right? Some physical challenges.
Well,
That
that's actually sparked from, yeah, that's sparked from the second Kundalini awakening
okay.
that happened in 2016. So that was just a slippery, it started with the Kundalini, and then I ran around like a chicken with my head cut off to all kinds of, healers, doctors, shamans, yogis, guru, whatever. I'm like, whoever can help me figure this out because I don't know what's going on.
Hmm.
I really didn't know what was going on. Like I really had no clue what was really happening. And so I would, scan the forums and try and figure it out on my own because there was really nobody that could give me a clear answer of what was happening. One of the doctors that I had gone to see had given me this treatment that she said that what was going to help with anxiety. And she had given me something called a glutathione push.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and what glutathione is, for people who don't know, it can help get rid of heavy metals and other toxins. But if you are given glutathione orally or intravenously and your body is not prepared to detox the heavy metals or the other toxins, let's say, what can happen is that those toxins can essentially get whipped around your body, cross the blood-brain barrier, get into your nervous system, and ultimately wreak chaos on your body. And that is what happened to me. I had one treatment of glutathione and very rapidly went downhill. I went from, just having kind of like some visual stuff and a bit of anxiety from the Kundalini to absolutely suicidal, chronic pain throughout my whole body. It felt like a
Mm.
mixture of like MS with fibromyalgia. And I
Oh,
just felt like I was deteriorating like every day more and more. And it was really bad. And it was for a few years. The bad part of that started I would say
that lasted years. Wow. I feel for you.
thank you.
Yeah,
I'm a different person
that's rough.
and I'm on the other side. So,
Yeah.
I can talk about it in a way that feels like as if it was happening to somebody else at this point. So I'm
Hmm.
grateful for that. But it was very difficult. So it started in the fall of 2017 and kind of came to a close the end of 2022. It was
Hmm.
a journey, like a journey. Throughout that whole journey, there were like 2 years where I was just white knuckling it every single day.
I know how that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Had really severe COVID in 2020 and just obliterated my cardiovascular system, my nervous system. It was a very potent spiritual portal, though. I learned a whole new relationship with death and healing and surrender. Like, surrender when you're confronted with such intense pressures internally and externally, and such an increased amount of the unknown, which is just really hard on the analytical mind and the ego. And so, the surrender becomes such a powerful medicine. But yeah, it took me like maybe a year to be able to walk like a mile again. Or
I
yeah.
didn't know that you went through that.
Yeah, yeah, it was a near death experience for me, for
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
you could,
I have it's interesting in so many people's spiritual journeys that there tends to be a really intense physical experience in the midst of that awakening experience.
yeah. Yeah. I'm so sorry that you went through that.
Likewise. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm certainly on the other side, but
Yeah.
but it's something that changes you for sure.
Oh, 100%. I'll never be the same person after that. Like my perspective on life and humanity and just everything, reality as a whole is changed for better or for worse, for forever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to kind of understand the purpose of what I went through because it was so dark and it was so deep and it was for so long.
That's a great question. I think about this a lot too. What do you think was the purpose of the darkness and the difficulty?
I'm still not entirely sure, but
Mm-hmm.
I did tell myself that if I got to the other side, that I was going to help others that were still in it.
Yeah, that resonates.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like often this is how, not healers per se, but like how facilitators become facilitators. Like
Mm-hmm.
you had to go through the darkness to understand how it works. And now you can shine the light for other people. But then my mind does this thing sometimes where it's just like, why? But then why? But why that? And why this? And it's
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm like, well, why get sick in the first place? Like,
Oh
what's the
my gosh.
point?
Yeah.
It's like, God damn it.
I know. I wonder that too. I'm like, did I really have to come that close to dying and having to rehab for over a year? Like, I really would have liked to have done without that.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But to your point, I don't know if I would have gotten to where I'm at. I wonder if I would have without that experience of being so close to death, without having that connection with benevolent. I think something visited me when I was very, very sick that helped to heal me, or it gave me hope. And in the years since, I've astral traveled back to those times when I was very sick, and it was almost like future and past me were interacting, which
Oh,
is
wow.
really interesting when you think about, like we talked about earlier, that time is just a construct, it's not real. So yeah, that's it's such a good question. Why could we have done without it? I like to think maybe.
And I think we would have been in an equally beautiful place in life.
Yeah.
That was a slightly different path.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it. But like what I got out from it, like, that's why I started the women's circle. It's why
I would love to hear more about this because this is how I first met you. Was
right?
this amazing, powerful container of other women that for me at the time was so needed and you create such a beautiful space for people to be seen and to grow and connect. So how did that come together and what do you see for maybe that evolving?
Yeah, I just found myself kind of while I was going through everything, I understood the power of community and how absolutely important it was, and how important it was to be open and vulnerable about everything that we're going through, the good and the bad, because if you hold things inside and you feel ashamed about talking about something that you may need help with, that's gonna cause some illness even. It's gonna cause
Mm-hmm.
some stress to stay stuck in your body, I think. Because I think one of our biggest fears as humans is being shunned,
Mm.
rejected, cast out, kind of, or looked down upon. Because I think
Abandoned, yeah.
abandoned, because historically speaking, if you were rejected from the tribe, you were dead.
Yep.
You were dead. And I think that fear still lives within us. So, all of these insights about how vulnerability creates deeper relationships and how good quality relationships creates a high quality life. And
Mm.
I felt like that's what I craved. And so other people were probably craving the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that on top of the fact that I felt as though I was waiting for somebody else to create the community that I desired.
Yeah. So you stepped up.
Stepped up. And
Yeah.
I was like, what else? What do I gotta lose? What do I have to lose? I've already been to, gone insane and back. Like I have nothing else to
Hmm.
lose at this point, like only things to gain. And, also the things that I wanted to do, I just felt like I was waiting for someone else to do it and just invite me along. And then
Hmm.
I said, F it, I'm going to do it myself. And so, Haley. So Haley and I started, there were three of us in the beginning, but it ended up being Haley and I. And so we started this women's circle and the response was so amazing and so beautiful that it gave me life. It gave me life.
Mm.
And so we started doing it every single month. And then last year we wound down a bit because I was traveling and Haley had just had a baby and, life happens. Now I'm getting more back into it again. I have another one this Saturday. I hope you can come. But
Yeah.
yeah, so how I see that evolving, I don't know, but I have been thinking about
Hmm.
it. The one thing that I would like to look into is how do I connect the San Francisco tribe with women's circles that are in other countries or other states?
Mm.
Because let's say that you're traveling to Rome and you don't know anybody, but maybe there's a women's circle there that's connected to our women's circle that you could easily tap into, and you have this automatic community as opposed to struggling to find friends or struggling to find people. It's already there. So I think
I
that,
love the idea of that. Yeah.
yeah, so that's where
Yeah.
that's how I envision that going. It's kind of beginning stages right now, but that's my dream.
I think you also hit a really cool point and lesson here. I think that other people listening could maybe resonate with, which is when you don't see what it is that you're looking for out in the world. I think, especially right now, this is such a powerful time for creation, for finding your community, for finding support around the spiritual journey. And if you don't see anybody doing it, like just reaching beside you, behind you, in front of you, you could be that person that pulls something together and starts to step up and lead if you're not seeing it. So I love to pin that because I think we need so much more of it now. And I would love to hear about your card deck, which I'm kind of obsessed with. This is Conscious Communication card deck. And you mentioned a little bit about the why as far as vulnerability being power and connection. What was your other inspirations to creating this deck?
Well, while I was in the pits of despair, I had just like all of these existential questions running through my head on a 24/7 basis. And I'm like, I'm going to lose my
Mm,
mind if I don't get these like out of my system, basically.
yeah.
And so I started just writing down all these questions that I had. And there was a very long list of questions, and I narrowed it down to about 100. I started playing these questions with some friends, very, very, very terrified of the response that I was going to get. Because part of the reason why I wanted to open up to people was I wanted to tell them, like, hey, I'm really struggling. But I'm going to use these questions as a way to kind of like segue into that because I'm so uncomfortable talking about it. I created this game, one, because of the existential crisis that I was having, and two, because I needed to find the courage to open up and tell my truth.
Do you want to maybe pull two cards? And while you're pulling the cards, where can people find you in these cards?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram account, Conscious Conversations, and we also have. I'm in the process of redoing the website, so there's not a website at the moment, but you can find us on Etsy, where if you want to buy these cards, look for the Conscious Conversations account, or maybe you can link to it in the bio.
Yeah, we can link to it for sure.
This is what it looks like.
Beautiful.
And we can pull a card. So, what is freedom to you? What does it mean?
What is freedom to you? Such a good question. What is freedom to you? I think peace is freedom. Being in the present moment, like we talked to, is freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from the future. In a practical sense, for me, freedom is abundance, choice, authenticity.
Mhm.
Yeah. How about you?
I'd have to agree with all of that. I would say that the ultimate freedom is being free from the triggers inside of us.
Mm,
Being free from the trauma inside of us. So if you can be free from that,
yeah.
like, you're free. So I think that's freedom to me.
Yeah, it makes me think about, I think Eckhart Tolle, actually, like full circle moment, talks about in one of his books meeting Stephen Hawking's. And you would think that he would be one of the most unfree people, that he's trapped literally by his body. And Tolle talks about how he met him. I think at Oxford, they crossed paths or something at one point. And his perception was that he was one of the most free humans that he had ever come across. And I thought that was so beautiful because the freedom wasn't, I think there's different layers to this, so many layers to this question. That's why it's so good. He had a freedom of spirit in the present moment, having completely accepted his circumstances that were incredibly challenging. I love that kind of concept of freedom.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, you see a lot of people who, maybe they were born quadriplegic or maybe they have other handicaps, but then they turn into the most inspiring people you've ever seen in your life. And you're like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. So I feel like it just proves the point that like the freedom is in the mind.
Yeah, yeah. Pin that. Freedom is in the mind.
Freedom is in the mind. One more?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, I'll do one more. All right. If you could solve one world problem, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. One.
Yeah. Like top two or something.
Could solve one world problem. I think it would be, I don't know how you solve this. I mean, that's one reason why I built SoulPod, but being anywhere but the present moment. If I could help people, if I could solve that problem in people's minds of being in the past or the future, that that would probably be mine. Even more practically, I would probably I would love to solve helping people move from fear to love. It goes in that same vein. And then our planetary relationship as a species coming into better and more harmonious understanding, not just with ourselves and everybody on the planet as a planetary species, but the planet that we're living on.
Yeah.
Increased respect there as far as how we treat our environment. So that's a big one to try and narrow down. How about you?
I can relate to the first one that you were talking about because I keep thinking about like, why did I have two Kundalini awakenings? Why did I have a spiritual experience? Like, why did I see both the dark and the light of this energy that we have inside of us to such an insane degree? And part of me thinks that maybe, and I have no idea how this would even look. Like maybe one of my purposes here is to figure out how to take people that are out in the absolute darkest places in their life and bring them to that light that I know that exists, right? And I feel as though maybe my journey is to do that with myself first, is to bring myself back to that light, which has not happened yet. And create kind of like, it sounds silly because it's not a process that you can put in a box, but to create kind
Right.
of, you know, not a diagram. What's the word I'm looking for?
Structure.
Yeah, like a structure or guidelines and kind of like, here's your best shot or here's the best way to kind of like go from the darkness to the light.
I love that. That resonates. And wherever you're at, for people who are listening, you're in the exact right place. And this is an infinite onion. There's so many layers to this. And I think that's so sounds like some really potent wisdom that's percolating within you, that you've had these experiences that have a purpose in what's going to come forward and what has come forward and what will continue to come forward for you. So I'm so excited for your journey, Jules. Thank you so much for sharing
Of course.
this with us. And a few rapid fire questions for you that we ask everybody that comes on. One is, what is one belief that you no longer believe?
That vegetarians are weird. I am a vegetarian.
You are a vegetarian now?
I was vegan and then I went to vegetarian. But yeah, I used to
I
think
love it.
vegetarians were so weird, for sure.
What do you believe consciousness is?
I think about this a lot and I honest to God don't know.
Great answer.
No idea.
What is, similar question, but a little bit different. What is source, God, or oneness?
What is source, God, or oneness? Okay. So God, I believe, is a divine creator. The energy or energies or intelligence that created all of this. And I don't think it's one being. I think it could be one being that has multiplied into millions of beings, or there's multiple gods, let's say. But going back to kind of what I experienced in my first awakening in 2012, when I experienced everything that was connected energetically, I think that's oneness. We're already one. We just can't see it. But on a slightly more tangible level, we are all one in the sense that we ultimately depend on each other so deeply. If you just take a plate of food, a meal that you get at a restaurant, think about the amount of people that worked on the farmers, and think about the truck drivers and the people at the grocery store and the checkout people and the chefs and the waiters, and not to mention like the sun and the soil and the water that went into creating this food and growing. Like the amount of people that touched this one plate of food is crazy if you think about it. And so
we're so interconnected at a very practical level. There is no real going back to that not being the case.
Right. And I think that a lot of times we just kind of we forget that we really need each other. And so that's oneness in a different sense.
I love it. I love it. It's 100 years into the future. What do you hope for humanity?
I hope that we can see the oneness every day. and that we finally get over like these invisible differences that we think that we see. I just wish that we could see each other as cliche as it sounds, as brothers and sisters that are going through this thing called life for the first time together, and we really just need to hold hands through it.
I love that. That really resonates in my heart. Any parting words? Anything else you want to share today?
One of the things that you had mentioned earlier about how everybody, you are exactly where you're meant to be. One of the things that I understood during one of my awakenings was exactly that life is happening exactly how it's supposed to be happening. And to surrender to the mystery, as hard as that is. I think if we can do that and just accept and embrace and let life kind of show us the way, I think things will be a lot easier for us.
I love that. Surrender to the mystery. Beautiful. Thank you, Jules, so much for sharing your journey in vulnerability, your truth. It's inspiring. And thank you. I know there'll be many people that resonate with this. And till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for journeying with us today, Light Being. We hope you enjoyed the episode. And before you go, we want to invite you to explore the SoulPod app, where you can immerse yourself in daily lessons, guided meditations, and breath work to develop a soul-nourishing daily ritual and tune back into your own inner guidance system. You can download SoulPod in the App Store or directly from the show notes to start your free trial today and awaken the ancient wisdom within you.